Hello friends, this is Nick, aka Rockley Smiley. I'm here today to discuss my final impressions of Dark Souls 2, a kind of a big thing for me. I know this is a little bit outside of the scope of my channel. I don't usually do a lot of this sort of auxiliary type content, but I thought this was a thing that would be worth mentioning. I've had a lot of requests to talk more about Dark Souls in various capacities, and since I did a roundtable with Ryan and Josh a little while ago, that I thought it would be kind of neat to revisit some of the same notes that I had talked about during that little episode that we did, and I think that was a really productive conversation. I really enjoyed how that went. So I do want to, give a forewarning here. This is a discussion geared in mind towards people who have finished Dark Souls 2 or don't care at all about spoilers. I'm going to be talking about the game in its entirety. Every element of it is up for grabs, so very possible I will discuss the final boss and or other very large spoilery elements throughout this entire recording. So, if you're someone who cares about that, don't watch this, or come back, favorite it if you don't mind, and then come back to it when you finish Dark Souls if you care. And also people who don't want the Let's Play spoiled or the various Let's Play. I know this seems a little silly to, put a caveat for a Let's Play, but, if you want to watch the game play out in front of you, instead of just see it kind of broken apart, then there you go. So yeah, now that that's out of the way, no one can yell at me for not telling you about spoilers. Like I said, there will be spoilers. Okay, there will be spoilers. I'm going to say it again. There will be spoilers. Okay, I'm done. So Dark Souls 2 is a game that I've been playing a whole bunch. You may be aware of this. Managed to get an early review copy. I was very, very fortunate with that. Me and Ryan and Josh all got one. And from the day that I received it, I had played the game as many hours as possible. Basically, I was playing that game nonstop. My goal was to try and finish it by the time it actually was released, so I had about a weekend for that to happen, a little bit more than, like a long weekend in both directions, actually, because the long weekend's usually like 3 days or something. Anyway, yeah, so I didn't quite make it. I was the last of the three of us to actually finish the game, which is totally fine. I wasn't like in a rush for any particular reason other than that I mostly just wanted to have my own private personal experience with the game, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. Also, I think I'm probably the most meticulous of the three of us in how I played through everything. I pretty much looked as closely as I could at every bit of the environment, trying to find all the items. I mean, my goal is to 100% the game. I still haven't quite done that. But at this point, I have actually finished the game. I've beaten the final boss. I've explored all of the areas reasonably well. I think there's still a couple of things that I'm still missing. There's one optional boss that I know where it is, and I just have been too lazy to go back there to kill it. And I'm pretty sure I'll be able to kill it in a few tries at most. And possibly another boss that I'm not totally sure exists. There's still some things that are sort of out there in the ether. And this will be very strange looking back at this video later, once I have a whole bunch more knowledge than I do right now, because this is sort of the stages of Dark Souls understanding tend to come in waves, right? So if you've been around for the original Dark Souls... and before I get into this story, I should mention I did not summon anyone. This was offline completely, the whole game, all the way through. All of it has just been me playing by myself, with very little in the way of interaction with other people that have played the game. I did talk with Josh and Ryan. That was actually really fun. I think that was probably some of the most fun I had about the game, was a sense of camaraderie between myself and them and everyone else that had a review copy, and that we had this little sort of insular community for the moment that was all trying to struggle through this crazy experience and do our best to help each other without being able to directly help each other, and occasionally make references that might be helpful and sometimes not. Anyway, I think that was one of the best things that I had going about it. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of get the caveats out of the way. This is a 360 version. It's going to be weird looking back on it, though, once I have all this knowledge. I know now I'm going in circles, but 360 version, it's good, but it's also bad. There's things about Dark Souls that I think are going to be really weird to look back. Once I get the PC version, that's going to change things a little bit. There's going to be a whole different element when I look at it through the lens of having, community content, once the wiki is filled out, once every little bit of knowledge has been ripped apart and regurgitated and, redone, re-looked at over and over again. That's all going to change the way that your filtration works with Dark Souls. So anyway, the story that I was about to launch into earlier was that I was sort of hearkening back to when I played the original Dark Souls, how there was a bit of a learning curve, yes, but also a bunch of stages that were involved in the process of understanding and filtering through the information that Dark Souls contains. I would say that Dark Souls 1 probably in my top 5 games of all time. I really love the game. I respect the developers. I think they did so many wonderful things about it. It's like walking through a piece of art a lot of the time. And a lot of those concepts, I don't know that they necessarily carried over to Dark Souls 2. So we're going to explore those concepts in greater detail. But in general, I just felt like there's a lot of things to do with how Dark Souls 1 compares to Dark Souls 2 and why I find those two things different that are worth mentioning. And it goes without saying probably that, like, obviously I have a very high opinion of both Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. But I do think that Dark Souls 1 is probably the better game. But that also comes with the caveat of me finally finishing this story and saying that each time you get a new Souls game, there's going to be a stage where you're starting to work at it a little bit, you're starting to get into things, you're learning it, you're having your own personal process of going through the game. And this is the way I play it. I know you can also just summon people and just run through the game and basically do that kind of thing. But I like to look at every little nook and cranny. I like to investigate. I like to explore. I like to open all the doors. I like to fight all the bosses. I like to find all the content. Basically everything that's in the game I want to uncover little by little. And I think that's really cool. So the first time you play through the game, you're going to miss a whole bunch of things. If you choose to go back through it again with New Game Plus, you're going to find a whole bunch more of those things that maybe you missed the first time through. And then after that, you're probably going to start to branch out, or somewhere in between, probably at the end of your first game, at the beginning of your second game. You're probably going to start looking around to see what other people had to say about this and see if you could maybe find some more things that you maybe didn't think to look for. So there's that part of the process. Eventually you start to, branch out beyond your own understanding and share your knowledge with your friends and the world at large, essentially. And then after that, you'll have pretty much everything down that you need to know. You'll start to maybe fine-tune. This is, depending on how involved and totally psyched about this concept you are. You might go back and fine-tune some of your processes for getting through the game. You might look for faster ways to get through things. You might try to min-max. You might try to optimize your runs. Look for the best weapons. Look for the best gear. Try to make the best build. Try to experiment with different builds. Try to play a different class. Whatever you're into. I mean, there's 100 different options of how you can play through the game, and that's partially why it's such a unique and awesome experience, because it's really up to you. There's a lot of things you can do. In fact, if you want to, you can try and challenge yourself even more. The game's freaking hard as it is, but you can do a soul level 1 run if you really want to. You don't have to wear any armor. You can try and punch everyone to death. I don't really recommend it, but it's a thing you can do. So all of those things factor in, and eventually you leave the Dark Souls experience going, well, that was really cool, and I feel like I've pretty much sucked every bit of marrow out of the bones that are available in this experience. And I feel like I'm roughly at that point with the original Dark Souls. I've explored every bit of the geometry. I know basically where all of the things are, probably by heart, for the most part. There's a few items maybe that I don't remember 100% of the time, but if I'm running through the game, I don't have a lot of trouble recalling where I need to go or what I need to do unless I just get myself really flustered by running around in circles or something, or I'm just having a really bad day. You never know. So right now where I'm at with the Dark Souls 2 process is I'm now at the end of my first playthrough. I've finished the game. I've found probably 90% of the things that there are to find in the game, but I haven't had any of the community element. I've never done any of the PvP. I've never really experienced much with the Covenants. So although I've seen everything that's essentially there for the solitary player, there's still all sorts of different things that are going to be unveiled over time in the long term, and that's where we'll enter the Stage 2 playthrough of the New Game Plus, and or expanding out to the community content, trying to see what other people have to say about things, trying to make sure I caught every little bit and piece that is there to find, and a lot of that, because of the way that the cyclical nature of these game releases tend to be, some of that stuff has been sort of preloaded and ready for launch because of the hype that's left over from Dark Souls 1. There's a lot of people that were ready with 40 parts of their Let's Play for the day that Dark Souls 2 came out. So the speed with which things were revealed in Dark Souls 2 and that whole thing happened much, much, much faster this time around. And we're at about a week and a half from when I got my copy and about a week from the thing coming out. And there's already so much information out, although the wiki hasn't quite made it there yet. But I'm pretty sure if I spent some time and looked through some forums and message boards, I think I'd be able to find just about everything that there will eventually be in sort of a curated format. So that's cool. I think that's, well, it's cool and it's not cool. In some ways, it takes away some of the personal experience, but that's why I was so happy that I got this experience of being able to share my time with friends and having my own private little moment with the game before it's sort of opened up to the world, and you never can really go back once that happens, right? Once the world knows, it's all been unveiled and everything, the secrets are unleashed, and it's really up to you whether or not you want to see them at that point. Being that I spend like 15 hours of my day generally online, doing various things for job-related reasons, I will probably not have had many opportunities to avoid spoilers in one format or another. And just the fact that everyone I talk to is super engrossed in the game of Dark Souls 2 means that, well, I'd really be missing out a whole bunch if I didn't get into it myself. So it was sort of one of those things where it's like, you either embrace it 100% of the time, or you're going to miss out. So this is why it was a little weird for me, like doing a Let's Play of this game day one. Certainly not necessarily the thing that I think is best geared for my channel. I don't know that I was really trying to give myself any sort of a leg up here. I think a lot of people would assume that if you're doing a day one Let's Play, it's because you want to try and optimize your search results. You want to try and get better rankings, so more people will find your channel, and they're on. That's all legit. That's all valid, and for business reasons, it's essentially true. But the main reason that I wanted to get this day one Let's Play in is because, well, I wanted to do a Let's Play of the game one way or the other, and if I waited until the PC version, everyone I talk to is already going to know the game inside and out, and I'm just going to be essentially left behind. So since I wanted to do it anyway, why not try and, maximize my chances of having success from it? Not that I necessarily expected anything from it. The series has been doing about as well as any other Let's Play series I do, which is fine. I'm not going into this again with any expectations. It's all good. But I just wanted to kind of put that information out there, because I've been asked, like, what's up with that? Like, that's not your style. I don't really do day one Let's Plays. I usually just play games whenever I want. And that is, again, kind of what happened. I did want to play it as soon as I could because I love Dark Souls. Anyway, I should probably get into actually talking about the game now that we've covered 11 minutes of everything around the game, and maybe a little bit of the game as well. So the thing that I want to cover myself by saying about 100 times, other than spoiler warning, is perceived negativity is going to be a thing in this video, and I'm certainly going to be talking basically a lot of things that are going to sound sad and negative, and that I hate the game, and that, no, it's not like that. I mean, there's a bunch of criticisms I have, but because I have these criticisms, don't take it to be that I'm now having the final word, that my forever carved-in-stone opinion is that Dark Souls sucks because of this thing I said. It doesn't work like that, no. I like this series. I think it's a really good series. I think Dark Souls 1 might be a better game, but I'm also going to grant that I still have the rest of that process to get through with Dark Souls 2. My opinion is not yet fully formed despite having finished the game. And it's a unique thing to this series in some ways, because I think there aren't a lot of other games that have this kind of longevity that expands beyond even its own existence for a little while. Everything has already been created, but until you experience all facets of this form, it doesn't really matter that you've experienced it all. It's not really all of it until you find all of it. That doesn't really make any sense. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is don't be down on the fact that I might say some negative things about Dark Souls 2. It doesn't mean I hate it. It doesn't mean that I might not change my mind later. And it doesn't mean that a lot of the things that I have criticisms about may even end up getting changed themselves, because, again, I'm criticizing the 360 version, not the PC version. And I have a feeling a lot of the things I'm going to bring up, well, several of the things, not a lot of them, but several of the things are going to probably change to some degree, which is why the game came out, or will be coming out, about a month afterward. So anybody that's watching this that has the PC version, well, just also keep that in mind. This is a time-dated, time-sensitive piece of video content. Oh, by the way, I should mention, if I haven't already, I should be having some kind of probably generic me wandering around in Dark Souls video playing, so if you're wondering what was up with that, it may be footage that I captured for another auxiliary video that I may be doing in the coming days, so just, be aware that I'll be probably cutting in and out of various things. Anyway, I've kind of gone over a few points already that I wanted to hit later on, but that's totally fine. So let's start with system changes. This is a thing that I talked about again in the roundtable discussion I had with Ryan and Josh. There's humanity. Well, there's a few different system changes that I want to cover. Humanity, Estus, the life bar, and leveling, all of which totally impact the way the game works as it pertains to Dark Souls 1. I think there are some Maybe some positives, probably more negatives in general, in my own personal opinion. Also, that's another thing. I feel like I shouldn't have to say this, but all of this is just my personal opinion, and I am up for debate on any of it, and again, my mind can always be changed. I am not one of those people that is going to fight anyone to the death over their opinion on the internet. It is not worth it to me. We all have very strong opinions, and that's fine. We love the game. That's the way it's going to go. So look at it this way. I'm criticizing the game because I love it so much, and I just want to show all the sides that I can, express of my enjoyment of the series. And sometimes I feel that a lot of it is to do with my own expectations, and maybe they're a little bit too high at times. So, again, criticisms, don't take them to heart too hard. So system changes. Humanity. The way it works in this game, and you've probably already heard this a dozen times, but humanity is now human effigy. You can pop one at any time, and you go human, and it doesn't restore any health. So once you lose it, again, once you die, it's gone. There's no humanity number in your top menu area where you can recover it with your souls or anything like that. You don't use it to kindle bonfires. It's really just there to refill your life bar and to also get NPC summons or, do various covenant-related things perhaps as well. So it's a weird system. The thing that this ties in best, though, with humanity is the life bar and the fact that every time you die, you lose something like, about 5% of your health, which caps out at a minimum of 50% of your health bar. So, you die about 10 times, you're going to have half your health. And I might be off on the numbers, but as far as I could tell, it seemed like it was 5%, and then when you're wearing a specific ring, it goes to 2.5%, meaning that actually caps you off at 75%. After 10 deaths. I might again be wrong on the math here, but the spirit of what I'm saying holds true regardless. I don't necessarily think that that's a positive improvement. I don't know why we needed to have less health to be punished for dying. It seems like an artificial way to make the game harder that doesn't really do anything except frustrate the player, in my opinion. It seemed like it was just fine the way it was before, personally. Humanity was a thing that I actually kind of really did get into the risk-reward mechanism in the original Dark Souls, and again, don't be too worked up if I would say too many positive things and then contrast them with pseudo-negatives with Dark Souls 2. It's just, I have a fondness for Dark Souls 1, what can I say? I think that the way it worked with the original one was, hey, you popped 99 humanities. Hopefully you didn't, because that's crazy talk, but it's been done. And then you died fighting the Four Kings. That's implausible. No one would do that. But it probably has happened by someone just messing around. But yeah, then you've got this soul sitting in a boss, and the soul's got 99 humanity on it. And if you pick it up, you get them back, minus the one that you were alive with, presumably. And that sort of lends a whole different level of transience to what we've got now. So we've got all these humanities that essentially they're going to get eaten, they're going to be consumed, and they have no permanence to them. Like, as soon as you fight a boss or, fight something that curses you, you instantly lose your humanity. You are not human. You go back to being a zombie skeleton beef jerky man, and that kind of sucks. It's okay. Like, it's not, in the scheme of things, you get enough human effigy that it's not going to make the game that much worse, and that's kind of where a lot of my criticisms lie. It's like, all right, well, we just aren't going to have a perfect experience in my own mind, my own expectations, but it's not going to make the game bad or anything. It's just, it could have been better, maybe. So, regarding the health bar going down, like, if you get yourself stuck on a really hard boss, and this has happened to me a bunch of times through my playthrough, you're going to die a whole bunch of times, and you're probably going to use a bunch of human effigy trying to restore your health bar to maybe get a boss summon, but each time you die, that human effigy is gone forever. So think about it this way. So there's a boss in the Bastille, for example, that we've got 3 bosses we got to fight at the same time. There is a boss or NPC summon in one of the jail cells on the way to that Bastille boss. Your second time through the game, this probably won't be quite as bad, hopefully. But for me, it was a little bit challenging regardless. But you burn a human effigy, go human, run through this thing. There's actually a shortcut where you have to take a leaping dive if you want to skip about 8, knights that you've got to fight. And in case you just screw that jump, well, you just killed your effigy. Like, that one's just gone. At the time I was doing this, I was working with about a total of maybe 12 of them. So each time I missed the jump, that's one gone. Sometimes I'd make it up all the ladders still human, and randomly some knight would follow me up the ladder and then corner me while I was trying to get the summon in. You know, that'll kill you, and then that's another human effigy gone. Say you actually make it into the boss with the summon, you get hit right away. Before you even have a chance to move, you get stun locked and killed. The NPC summon that you brought with you is super slow, so by the time you actually are dead, he's just phasing through the fog wall. So that was no help. So that's potentially 3 down right there. So now we're working with 9, and each time you do this is mounting tension of, well, I'm a little bit more worried now that I'm going to put myself in a position where I'm objectively about to make my game worse. There's not really like a reset. Like, it's not like you can just decide, well, now I'd like all of my human effigies back that I need to potentially have a chance to kill this boss. No, what happens is you find yourself in a downward spiral where you eventually, if you just are bad enough for long enough, you'll run out of human effigy, your health bar will drain to 50%, and or if you have the ring, you can get it up to 75%, which is a really good thing that they at least included that. But there's no way to just completely bow out of the health drain system. But then you find yourself in a boss, and like you're at, let's say you never found the ring, you're at 50% health with no boss summon. Chances are, unless you pull off something really miraculous, you're probably just going to keep getting killed. You know, there's nothing to really turn the tides in your favor unless you start popping a bunch of other items, like, putting various effects on your sword or something, or trying a different build entirely. And I guess at the end of the day, that might be what they're encouraging with that. You know, if you screw up too badly, there are still some options. You can always go farming, but I'm not sure exactly where you farm for human effigy. I'm sure there's somewhere around. But you can also kill the witches back at the original first zone if you'd like to perhaps get a little bit of a bonus there. I think, well, each witch I think is worth about 5. So what is there? I think there's 3 or 4 of them in there, so potential of about 20 human effigy. But then you can't respec your character if you ever wanted to do that. As long as you leave one alive, though, I think you still can. I'm not sure if any of them can respec, but that might be why there's so many in the first place. Anyway, that's kind of that system. I'm not sure I necessarily like it, but again, it's not so detrimental that it necessarily breaks the game unless you're really, really bad, I suppose. But I just don't know if I like the concept of that even being a possibility. The other option is, well, and this is sort of, I guess, sort of tied into the whole thing. Another system that's changed is, well, after you kill an enemy is like 10 or 12 times, it just despawns forever. So if you find yourself in that downward spiral of dying constantly, hopefully each time you die you've taken out a few enemies, unless you're line stratting through everything, which means basically just running by all the enemies. But every time you kill them, well, it's one less time you have to worry about killing them, and then eventually they'll just be gone. Doesn't work for bosses, obviously, but, you know, that's a whole nother thing. So the idea being, as you're making your life worse on the run to the boss, you're also potentially making your life easier at the end of the day by not having to ever fight those enemies again, which also means that in the terms of grinding for souls, if you want to do that type of thing, eventually there's just not going to be an enemy there anymore unless you use a bonfire aesthetic, which is a whole nother item that essentially respawns everything, just resets the zone back to where it was, and I think even the items go back too, which might let you cheese the game in some unique ways, like trying to get Estus shards and such. And that sort of works as a nice transition to the next thing, Estus shards and the bone dust that you get, which are your ways of leveling up your Estus and giving it more charges, because in this game there's a split health system, sort of like in Demon Souls. Maybe not split, but there used to be herbs in Demon Souls where you'd basically pop an herb as your general healing item, and now in Dark Souls they introduced this item, you know, the thing that we've been using, the Estus Flask, which is a restorable health item. Now every time you rest at a bonfire, you gain it back. In this case, when you first get your Estus Flask, it is just one Estus Flask. That's it. There's no charge beyond that. You use once, you're out until you rest at another bonfire. So it creates a new dynamic in that you now need to be on the lookout for these very important items. And, you know, much like we were on the lookout for Firekeeper souls in the prior game, which let us, you know, basically make our each heal worth more. In this case, that's going to be the bone dust on this, but you can only use the bone dust on the Majula bonfire, so you still have to take a visit back there. As far as that goes, the shards and the bone dust, I don't mind that much. At first I was a little bit confused by it because it seemed like the beginning of the game was maybe stacked against you a little bit much, but once you have some of that experiential learning from playing through the game, spending some time with it, trying to, navigate your way around the game world and just figure out where some items are, the second time through is not going to seem nearly as bad. And that's where I was at going through in my Let's Play. Way easier the second time. I knew right where I was going. If I wanted to get the most out of a zone, I knew where those Estus Flash shards were. I was going to beeline straight for them. And there's my passive healing, or, well, not passive healing, but it's you know what I mean, right? Passive being that you get it back every time you rest, not passive like it's just always healing. There's a ring for that, though. That's the Dark Souls motto. There's a ring for that. Although there isn't necessarily a ring for everything. I've actually found a few things that I wish there were rings for that I didn't find one. So that was Humanity, Estus, and the Life Bar. We haven't talked about leveling, though. Leveling's a real strange thing for me. Leveling, I wish you didn't need to go back to the Emerald Herald every single time. There's a lady at the main area, and I don't know why I'm explaining this, because I already said, like, hopefully you've already finished the game if we're having this discussion, but the lady at the main hub bonfire in Majula is the only person you can ever level up at, ever, in the whole game. It never changes. I always thought maybe you get to a certain point in the game, we'd go somewhere new, we'd have our, like, Anorlando reveal moment, and then we could level up anywhere or something. Maybe instead of having us able to teleport at any time from, getting the Lord Vessel, maybe this game's reveal was that we'd be able to level at any bonfire. Never happens, in case you were wondering. There's that squashed rumor for you. So, yeah, it's weird. It just basically results in you looking at tooltips a lot more. I guess it's sort of a tradition thing, because this is more like what it was like in Demon Souls, but I don't really understand the positive to it. It's just a thing that makes you look at a loading screen more. You could have, at any point, teleported from any bonfire to Majula. There's never a point, even, like, there's no moment like in Duke's Archives where you're locked away from the other bonfires. You can always leave from any bonfire to any other bonfire. It doesn't matter where you are in the game. So you could, at any time, and I mean any time, because you have Homeward Bones and later an item that gives you infinite Homeward Bones. You can leave in the middle of combat for the most part and go ahead and go rest at a bonfire that then takes you to Majula, where you can then level up. So in the worst possible moments, you can still do that. So what was the advantage in making us watch potentially 2 loading screens? Or 3, actually, if you think about it. Say you're in the middle of combat, you're fighting at the Bastille for some reason, you're going looking for items or something. You decide, hey, I've got 14,000 souls or 26,000, whatever, how many thousand souls you've got, and you want to go do a level and put it into attunement or something because you're trying to get another slot open for your spells. Well, what you have to do is, potentially, if you're in the middle of the field and not near a bonfire, which is pretty rare that happens. Honestly, there's bonfires pretty much everywhere, which may be another one of my complaints about the game. But in the middle of that, pop a Homeward Bone, or use your Ancient Feather, or whatever the hell it's called, and that takes you back to the last bonfire you rested at, and unless that was Majula, that was a loading screen. Now we're going to go do another loading screen as we teleport to Majula, do our level where we listen to the NPC do 4 lines of dialogue every single time, no matter what, forever for the entire game, even after you've beaten it. Then watch another loading screen as you go back to the last closest bonfire to the area that you want to now resume combat in. So how did that make the game better? I don't understand that one at all. Feel free to have discussions about this concept, by the way, in the comments. I'm curious. Let's just all please keep our tone civil. That is the one thing that I request. This is not an area for people to be hyperbolic and yell at each other. And even if I have reasonably impassioned comments about this kind of stuff, please do bear in mind this is, again, just my own personal opinions. Nothing here is being expressed as law or anything that you should have to, listen to. If you're not agreeing with it, totally cool. We all have different opinions on things. So those are basically the different changes that they've made that I'm not sure I necessarily am totally on board with as it pertains to Dark Souls 2 in regards to Dark Souls 1. Next thing, difficulty of the game at large, regarding boss numbers, enemy numbers, how things are placed, how's the level layouts, all of that stuff. I find that in general, Dark Souls 2 did not quite do it for me the same way. It felt like a big old boss rush for the majority of the game. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. I find a lot of the strengths in the game come from the well-designed bosses. In this case, though, I felt a lot of the time I was basically just circle strafing around while locked onto a boss, waiting for the boss to start a 3-hit combo that eventually either hits my shield or completely misses everything, and then I'll hit one time, wait through another cycle of attacks, and then I'll repeat. I know I'm being a little bit harsh in my criticism here on this one. The bosses do have some variance to them. There's a number of different challenges, including, the rat boss, where there's like a whole pile of rats that you have to wade through. There's a sickly dog. Basically, like, everything that you can find in real life just with the plague is like what you fight in this game. Or is a giant knight with crazy huge hitboxes that will hit you from mostly all the way across the map that they tend to give you. Most of the bosses have some sort of a caveat to them, though, and this is a thing that I found out later, not so much on my first playthrough, but almost every one of the bosses has some way that you can sort of manipulate something, all the really hard ones, I should say, anyway, to make the boss fight a little bit easier in your favor. For example, the one boss that I thought was just total bullshit, and I will say this freely, is the Medusa lady at the top of the poison tower. That was a garbage boss fight because you were just going to be poisoned for the whole fight. The whole boss fight takes place in a pile of poison, and she also will just basically strikes you at all the ranges that you can come in. And they start out right before the boss fight. You have to wade through this like waist-deep pool of poison. So you will then be poisoned for the amount of time that it will take you to get up to the boss door, and then be able to actually, start losing health unless you pop an item, and then also lose health as soon as you're in the boss fight because you're also standing in waist-deep poison. I don't know about that one, but I found out that you can apparently light a windmill on fire that makes the poison dissipate in some areas, so it's not all poison all the time. There's also possibly another bonfire that lets you just, like, drop right down to the I gotta figure all this stuff out. But what I did was basically kill all the enemies from the last bonfire I knew about all the way up to the boss fight over and over again for like an hour until they all despawned. That wasn't fun. I found that very frustrating. I found it to be a thing that I did not enjoy. It made my enjoyment of the whole game actually grind to a halt for a while. That was probably the darkest time of my Dark Souls 2 Let's Play, or Dark Souls 2 playthrough, rather. And I was real salty, like, all the time. Everything I was doing during that day was not pleasant for me. And I'm being, like, super hyperbolic about this. In the scheme of my life, I was not actually upset. I was just, like, I was being bitchy for a while. That's just how it is. And there were several boss fights that I felt that way about that just seemed, like, unnecessarily annoying. Not to say that they weren't overcomeable. I beat all of them eventually, just like, man, why did we need to do that kind of undue frustration to the player, right? I'm thinking of also, like, the Last Sinner, a really fast boss, uses a sword with pretty long reach. Apparently the trick with him is you can actually use your torch to light up the oil lamps on the sides of both sides of his boss fight area if you have a certain key, and that will make him basically weaker in a few ways. Like, he'll take a little longer to jump around. You might be able to get a single more hit in general. And he also will not lose lock-on when he jumps away from you. So, some little movements like that could make things substantially easier. And once you know the path to get through things and get back to the boss fight, it certainly makes it easier as well. Plus, once you know that there's a summon there, it certainly helps quite a bit too. The other thing is, the difficulty was pretty difficult the first time through. It's, again, experiential, though. My second time playing through the game is certainly not going to be nearly as bad. I was actually able to beat the freaking giant on my first try after it took me like an hour or two or something. It took me many, many deaths the first time I did it because I was not seeming to understand the concept of sticking to the leg that was not stomping me. For some reason, I kept trying to roll, and the game has bullshit hitboxes, so he just kept stomping me from outside of what I thought to be the range that he could hit me at. Anyway, other thing, enemies, I find that to be another sort of artificial difficulty that I didn't really find to be as pleasant. There were a few moments in the game where it just felt like, just F everything, just they're going to throw like 100 enemies at you, because why not, right? I feel like that was kind of the opposite of how Dark Souls 1 took its approach. Yes, there may have been a gauntlet of many enemies in a row, but rarely did they send many of them at you all at once unless... well, they were kind of weak, easy enemies, sort of like the dudes that you'd find in, like, the area by the Painted World. Those ninja guys that just basically throw a whole bunch of throwing knives at you, but, just use the pillars, get around them, And then when you find your way into the painted world, there's mostly a whole bunch of hollows with torches and stuff. So, you know, it wasn't all that crazy. And then they introduced some new enemies. Given the perspective I have now, I feel like Dark Souls 1 is going to be drastically easier if I went back to it. I also kind of didn't realize quite how bad I was at Dark Souls 1, now having had the perspective how good I need to be at Dark Souls 2 to be, you know, attentive enough to be able to deal with so many things all at the same time. The specific place I'm thinking of is the Shrine, and I'm sure you guys will know what I'm talking about. The frickin' homing spells are so annoying. The same thing with the kind of deserty place that I'm now forgetting the name of, which is, you know, down by the cathedral before you fight the spider boss. This is a bad place. Anywhere there's magicians that shoot homing bullets at you, nobody likes that. I did not have very good magic defense either, so each one of those bullets that would hit me would do, like, I don't know, an eighth of my health bar, which is crazy because I had a huge health bar because I basically played a really heavy, tanky, slow-rolling mofo of a knight. And his whole deal was basically just hit hard, don't get out of the way, tank everything through the 100% block shield. That's not a fun way to play Dark Souls, I found out, so probably won't do that again in the future. You probably want to stick with somebody that can get out of the way most of the time. I think you'll have a much better time doing that in general. So my general assertion about the difficulty of Dark Souls 2, I think a lot of the frustrations I experienced on the first run-through will be many, many times over-mitigated by the knowledge that I now have from playing through the game. I used to regard the freaking pirate Viking area as being the crazy shit known to man. Getting a little bit more perspective on that, I find probably the run-up to talk to the big old dragon lord at the top of the hill to be one of the scarier things. There's basically heavy knights everywhere, and all of them will kill you in like 2 hits. And all of them will stagger you, and all of them will stun lock you, and all of them will trap you in a corner, and all of them have range that's 30 times bigger than your range. Well, I guess I can't speak from everyone's perspective, but my range was not fantastic. I was using a freaking broadsword for half the game, and then eventually got a Black Knight halberd, which is pretty good. I kind of recommend that, especially if you learn to use the overhead strike all the time. That one works pretty well. Anyway, what's next? I want to talk about the art style and the level design a little bit of Dark Souls 2. Art style in general, one of my favorite things about the original Dark Souls, absolutely fantastic looking game. It had a wide swath of different styles of art going on it. Well, I shouldn't say styles of art. It was actually very much gothic, fantasy, you know, medieval knights and Renaissance painting style, beautiful, vast architecture. Everything was opulent or decayed, with, you know, some variance therein between the two. I really just liked the diversity of the different range and the various elemental qualities that you'd find in Dark Souls 1. There were places that were just, you know, beautiful nature. You know, there were forests, there was the crystal caves, there was the Duke's Archives, we had Anor Londo, which was beautiful and towering and wonderful and glorious, and then we had the dregs of the worst in the, you know, getting down into Lost Isleth, the deepest, darkest, most evil shit known to man. You know, you've got the New Londo ruins. We've got everything just basically filth and decay and decrepitude turned into human vile form, and, you know, all of it's attacking you and trying to steal your soul, and there's ghosts and specters, and there was a whole different set of color schemes and different varieties of ways that you could look at the game. When you take it into Dark Souls 2, it seemed to me like the art design was really very much uninspired compared to the first game, and this is going to be kind of a big criticism for me. And this is kind of, I think, a lot of where my expectations maybe were too high. The whole game sort of sets the tone with Majula, right? Like, this is the place you're going to spend the most time in. It's this kind of like a coastline where there's just either we're in a sunset or we're always in a perpetual state of dawn. And I like that conceptually. I think it's a cool color scheme. You've got this very orangey blue thing going on, and that's fine. That's actually a color scheme that seems to have been very prominent in the last few years in games for whatever reason. I've seen quite a bit of it, especially looking at like Devil May Cry or something like that. But then things start to go a little bit off the rails with regard to the color schemes and the art design. You look at a place like the Hildy's Fire Tower, or Hilda, however you pronounce it, another very beautiful place, but we're looking at a very similar concept, right? We've got coastline, we've got water, we've got what looks to be the ruins of Anor Londo, perhaps. I'm not sure what the timeline is. I don't really know much about the Dark Souls lore, unfortunately, so please, be gentle here. This is not my forte. It was a good-looking place. It certainly looked very breathtaking the first time I saw it, and then I find out, well, we never really go up into the fire tower, and also it's incredibly linear with the exception of a path to the left. And this is sort of one of my criticisms of the whole game, is like a lot of it's really linear in contrast to the other one. Everything's sort of wound together in this really wonderful tapestry in the original game, and in this one it feels like we're sort of following a little bit of the conventions of something like an MMO's architecture for building raid zones or something. Like, you've got a hub world, and you've got a couple little places that branch off of it, and those also, a couple of those turn into hub worlds, but they're like little minor hubs. And then from there, you've got these, like, very, very straight paths. And when I say straight paths, I mean, like, literally straight. Like, many of the zones in Dark Souls 2 are actually a straight shot. And if you look at the last zones, for example, there's, like, a kind of a haunted mansion that then leads to the dragon area. And the dragon area is probably one of the most interesting areas just because it's really unconventional in the design of it. But the run-up from those areas is literally a straight shot. Like, going through that mansion is a straight corridor. There's a couple of branching paths you can take that go off the sides, but the progression path is just go straight. And there's a whole bunch of times when this comes into play. Let me get I have a little, like a chart actually that I was looking at to give myself a little bit of perspective here. So starting at Things Betwixt, the original first zone, is literally another straight shot. Essentially, we're going to go from the starting point straight across a bridge that leads to a hut. We make a little left-hand turn. We go through a bunch of forest that has, side paths with little fog walls on them. But no, we actually, for progression, it is literally, again, straight, which leads us to Majula. There's the Forest of Fallen Giants, and I think the other one that would be the most non-linear would probably be the Sinner's Rise, Lost Bastille area. All of that in Belfry Luna. All of those together, as well as maybe Huntsman's Corpse. The least linear that I can think of. In fact, I think probably Lost Bastille was one of my favorite in terms of level design, just because it felt the most like something a little bit more reminiscent of the original Dark Souls. Things did open up a bit. But I want to go back again, talking about the art style a little bit. There's a lot of brown, dark green, and gray, and like burnt orange colors going on in this whole game, and it seems to be very consistent actually through almost every zone that I can think of, with a couple of exceptions. And I think probably the standout zone for me, and this is kind of bizarre saying this given how you get there, but I think Black Gulch was probably the prettiest looking area in my opinion. Also, I guess Dragon area was very pretty as well. And there's plenty of huge towering castles too, but they didn't feel like they had that much life to them. They didn't feel like there was as much opulence. They didn't feel like there was really a reason to be in them for the most part. They were just areas that facilitated other areas that led to transepts, that led to elevators, that led to bosses. Like, they were all just there. They didn't really have... It feels bizarre to say it like this, because obviously that's what a game is. Like, all games ever are is paths leading to other paths leading to bosses. They're all linear in the end, because there's a progress path. But thinking about the way that I played Dark Souls 1 as opposed to Dark Souls 2, and yes, there was still plenty of going off the rails in Dark Souls 2, and yes, I did still find plenty of secrets, but a lot of it just felt like I was mostly, if I wanted to go straight, that's how I get to the next area, with the exception of those two things. So, like, thinking about the art style of Forest of the Fallen Giants, mostly green there, things were very green, but then we started to get into a little bit of gray and a little bit of brown. Hilda's Fire Tower, bluish gray, definitely. Cathedral of Blue, well, there was like nothing there. It was basically a boss fight and then a path downstairs that led to a fire. Not really sure I understand even what the point of that zone being its own area was. It felt like it was ready to become something bigger and better, and just never really got developed. No Man's Wharf, basically shaped like a big old letter U. You start out on the left side, you work your way around a big hook to the other side to summon the ship. I thought when you summoned the ghost ship, that was kind of cool. I sort of like the nature of the light when they did that. Again, very orange, very blue, because we were dealing with predominantly dynamic light in this particular case, which is a thing that is totally consistent throughout the game. They want you to really emphasize this concept of using these dynamic torches, and they cast a very orange glow on just about every surface. That's cool. I like that in concept, but I think that the way the consoles could handle that kind of dynamic lighting really didn't come out looking artistically as nice as it should have. In Dark Souls 1, many less variables. We had a situation where the lighting was set by, well, they seemed to have like a tonal choice in that they could set the world fog. I'm sort of looking at this in maybe akin to something like Skyrim, because I've actually seen some of the back end of how Skyrim works with level design and stuff, and I think maybe some of the way the assets were built in Dark Souls 2 had a very similar prefab situation to them, and I found a lot of issues with the texturing and with the way that the models were built. There's actually some holes in the geometry. I've seen straight through parts of the geometry where you could see off into space, into endless void. I've seen situations where there were overlapping textures that, because of the way they built the model, they had two pre-configured models that all had textures on them, and then they just merged those two models without actually culling the space that was occupied by both of them at the same time, so you end up with textures that don't know which side should be over top the other one. So basically they're just flickering every time the screen refreshes, so if you move your camera at all, you're just going to see the thing flickering like crazy, and that's really sloppy in my opinion. The geometry holes too, like, I don't understand how they let that stuff go. There were also situations where I saw they had issues with texture scaling, where they maybe weren't sure how to align a texture properly, or a texture got auto-aligned in a direction that made no sense, so what it actually did was replicate about 2 pixels across the entire thing and just stretch it out until it's turned into like a smeared color or just a repetitive, jaggy tile. It's not good looking a lot of times. Again, there's a few moments of the game that are quite brilliant, and even like the shrine, dungeon or dragon area, the final few areas, some of those look really nice, but then you even get to the final boss zone, the Throne of Want, and going down that hill is like, wow, this is like nowhere near as cool looking as it was in the final approach of the original Dark Souls when you're going to fight Gwyn. You've got this area that looks like, my goodness, what is going on here? There was like some sort of a bomb that went off, and the whole area just looks like it's frozen in time. And that really reinforces, I think, a lot of what the lore is about. And in here, it just felt like there wasn't so much consideration paid. And again, I criticize this stuff out of love because, like, I really liked the minutia and the little details that made you wonder about why does that thing look the way it looks in Dark Souls 1? And in Dark Souls 2, I felt like a lot of the time it looks the way it looks because, well, you have some rushed modeling done, and they just needed to meet their deadline, and that just really takes me out of the game because I want to be able to consider everything that's there to be, sort of canonized in a weird way. And there's plenty of people that are going to be able to see past this stuff. I can even see past it a lot of the time, but I'm just speaking from, like, here's my sort of cynical, both sides of the fence look at this situation, and I think that it certainly could have been better, and I'm really eager to see how pretty this game looks when it's on PC. And I know there's going to be a lot of comments that are like, how dare you criticize the game strictly on its merits for being beautiful or a piece of art or anything like that. I totally hear you. It is not completely about that. I'm just talking about the things that irked me the most, and this is one of those things. The art style really did irk me quite a bit throughout the game. But I do completely grant you, the combat is pretty much just as fun as it was in the original game. To some extent, I think there were some issues with the hitbox. I think the AI might be a bit smarter in this game, which may lead to a little bit more frustration on my part because I'm not fantastic at the game a lot of the time. I roll right into the way of things all the time. But there were some creative things I saw done in the game, There was that moment where you're in Iron Keep, and there's like this cleaver that you set off with a lever on the wall. You pull it up, and then you have to count to 12. And you have to basically lure this Ninja Turtle down the hallway so it lands on the thing and kills it in one hit. And if you time it wrong, well, he's trapped on the other side of a wall, or he comes after you, depending on how you do it. That was a brutal run-up, by the way, to that boss fight. My goodness. Seeing those guys coming down the hallways, like, you have nowhere to attack, and they will always strike down overhead on you. And every single time, you're going to be in this position where you're in, like, the down position, where they have an advantage, being that they have this big, heavy-hitting mace. And likely, unless you're using the same weapon or something very similar, they're going to have a big advantage on how they're going to hit you versus how you hit them. Because that's just kind of the way it goes. Like, a lot of the time, their weapon will clip through a wall where your weapon will bounce off. I don't know. I guess it's just Dark Souls, the way it goes. And also, that is kind of one of the caveats I should mention. Like, I do understand it's Dark Souls. It's a hard game. I'm not new to this concept. I mean, I've 100%ed the original game. I've gotten everything there is to get in it. I've probably beaten it like 4 or 5 times in the game. It's all it's all not news to me. I'm not going to be surprised by the fact that I'll probably be called out for being terrible in some way or another during, because of the course of this video. I'm fine with it. It's totally cool. I just wanted to again, go over this stuff. Probably I'm putting too many apologies and caveats in now, but it's all right. What are the things that I want to talk about? So we've done a whole bunch about art style and level design. Area design, there seem to be a lot of dead ends, I noticed. After each final, Great Soul, it seems like you're essentially presented with this big box of bland geometry with nothing in it, nowhere to go except to, start up this primal bonfire that just warps you back to Majula again. And I get that. I mean, that's your hearthstone. That's your hearthing back home to Stormwind, I guess. That makes sense from a gameplay perspective, but I kind of like to believe that these worlds were designed as a living, organic place that has, purpose for the places that are designed. So when you get to a box, basically, and this happened, 4 times in the game, at least, you finish off a really big, crazy boss. You're usually presented with, a chest or something. Sometimes not even a chest. Sometimes it's not even anything, really. You just find yourself, you finish the boss, and it's like, oh, well, I guess you get some souls. And let's just keep walking. Oh, well, that's the end of this path. And then there's just a bonfire in a big empty room. I'm not sure why the rooms are so empty. So they have, no decorations in them. They have no ambience going on in them. Sometimes there's, one angry enemy in them. Sometimes it's just a dark room. There's not anything going on. I don't understand how that was the way that they decided the decor was going to be. There was obviously someone was like, well, so we want to make this artistic statement that when you beat the boss, you're going to teleport back to Majula. Okay, well, so, what are we going to put in the room where you go to this bonfire? Well, whatever. Oh. Well, we're going to just be there for a split second, right? So I guess functionally it doesn't really matter. Save them the time building assets, I suppose. But at the same time, wouldn't it have been way cooler if you could have used the areas that you finish those bosses with to somehow loop you back around to another place and another time and another whatever to get back to another part of the game. And that's just one of the elements that sort of drove me a little nuts, was the level design was so spread out. There were a few instances where you'd finish a boss or you'd finish an area and then you find out, well, oh, that was all a big shortcut, which is, a lot of the gestalts that I had playing the original Dark Souls were like, wow, this world is incredibly interconnected in ways that I never would have expected, and I really enjoyed making those discoveries. It really, and I know this is a little bit trite to say at this point, given how many years already we've been playing Dark Souls, but it gave me moments of wow, this is a lot like Super Metroid meets the movie 300 with some sort of crazy fantasy stuff overlaid on top of it, and that's crazy awesome. I love that concept. Adventure games with a sense of physicality. There's a tangible moment of you sharing this experience. It very much puts you in the place, in the ambience, in the atmosphere, for all of those reasons, because of the art style, because of the fact that there's these, great sound effects. Everything feels kind of alive. The fact that it's all interconnected, has a purpose of point of being. There's all these reasons for things to be the way they are. In this game, well, a lot of those reasons are for purely gameplay conventions, and that's okay. I'm not going to hate it because of that or anything, but it certainly doesn't elevate it to the same level that I think the original made itself find, that niche. What other things? There were a lot of elevators in the area design, I found. I don't mind the elevators intrinsically. I think they were probably used very often as loading points, very much the way that the doors in the original Resident Evil or the doors in Metroid Prime, they were a buffer zone, essentially, to make sure that the textures in the next area we're about to go to were loaded into RAM properly, and you didn't end up with some sort of, Mass Effect-style ugly texture then is replaced with shinier texture, then is replaced with bump mapping, then is finished. That is awful when that happens. So I'm glad if they had to take those precautions that they chose to do it using elevators. In the end of the day, it's really not a big deal. But it just had this, faux verticality, right? Everything as it is shown in perspective to everything else seems like you'd be making this massive progression, but the only real progression I ever felt like I was making was the beginning and the end moment. And I felt like maybe they storyboarded out some of this stuff in a weird sequence, and then they kind of lost the plot in the middle a little bit. When you first start in Things Betwixt, you'll see you're surrounded by these giant stone columns, right? And they just go up into the sky and outside of everything that you can see. And one of the last areas you're in is the Dragon Area, where you're walking on top of those pillars. So that is a progression that you can see makes a linear jump from one point to the next, and you see that you are literally at a better position. There's also a few moments where you see stuff far off in the distance and you never reach it, which made me a little sad because in the original Dark Souls, pretty much everything you could see everywhere you could eventually get to. Even if they took a few moments to make the way the geometry looks kind of awful from a distance, like I'm thinking of specifically when you're in Undead Parish, how you can kind of see down into Blight Town, or vice versa, you can see up to the top of, various areas that you probably wouldn't get to, or, when you're in Demon Runes, you can see down to Lost Iselith. Those are really cool little touches, and I don't feel like there's all that many of those. The few areas that felt like they did progress smoothly from one to the other still felt somewhat compartmentalized, but I'd still prefer this over the Demon Souls approach, or, Demon Souls, in that they're not completely just separate areas. I still like that they somehow intertwine. They just seem to do so in a very loose, meandering kind of way that isn't really all that relevant, which kind of begs the question of, like, why interconnect them at all then? All you're doing is kind of going through a series of linear paths that lead from point A to point B to point C. But then, there are some sequency progression path style things. You've got those fragrant, or whatever, branches of yore. I think they're fragrant branches of yore, whatever. They are a progression mechanic that allow you to unfreeze the various petrified NPCs that are in the world, and one of them happens to be in front of a switch, which is absolutely unlocking the next portion of the game. Maybe not in quite as meaningful a way as, like, Ascend's Fortress or something, where you ring the two bells and then the giant guards let down the gate. Like, that's just badass, right? Like, you've got these huge guards, and you're clearly part of something way bigger than yourself. If there's these guards that have this purpose that you don't even know, like, why do they need to open that gate if those bells ring? There's so much freaking curiosity and wonderment that goes into that kind of thing. In this one, very large gate is replaced by petrified lady that you give some clothes to, and you have to go, unpetrify her. That's really kind of all that is about. Then you get to the Winter Shrine, and the gate's just like, well, you can't come in. You've got to kill more bosses first. I hear you. That's cool. I mean, that's progression. That's how that works. We've got to sometimes kill some bosses. But it's just so blunt. It's so overt in how it tells you. There's no mysticism in that. And there's plenty of opportunities. There's NPCs all over the place, many of them telling you lengthy stories about things that you probably didn't care about very much. But they could have kind of woven those things a little bit better together, wound those things together, so you feel like there's maybe a sense of purpose to why you needed to get those 4 bosses. And not, again, that I'm really all that worked up about the story. For the most part, I think the greatest part about Dark Souls and the way the series works is that the story becomes self-evident through reading and through putting in the time that you want to invest in it to then take some things back out. So, if you don't feel particularly invested in the game, you don't have to worry about it. You just go right past it. I very much tended to skip by a lot of the dialogue, and that's okay. You can do that too, or you can choose to spend more time. Right, anyway, so we were, unfortunately, brutally interrupted there by some crazy coyotes in my yard that wanted to, I don't know, yelp at each other for a while. Seems like that's died down now, so we'll continue on with what we were talking about. Story, again, don't really need to get into it greatly. I think that's kind of a thing that you put in the time if you want. If you don't, you don't. One more thing about area design, I feel like there was a huge reliance on poison in general. It felt like almost every other area you went to was covered in poison. Specifically poison, I say. There were some areas where it was also about petrify and curse too. Both of those things are honestly really annoying. Having your rings break and be worth 15,000 to fix is not really fun, but, it's Dark Souls, so you deal with it. But just the reliance on poison. It's like, once you know that's the way the game's going to be, it changes the way you play it. But I kind of was expecting things to spread out in a bunch of different directions. I was expecting various elemental stuff to happen. And yeah, there's a fire zone. And yeah, there's like some dark places. But for the most part, it's like pretty much poison. So there's like the harvest area. What the hell is it called? Give me one second here. I want to look at the wiki here. Harvest Valley and Earthen Peak. Totally filled up with poison everywhere. Black Gulch shooting poison at you. The gutter, more poison. Grave of the Saints, there's rats there. The rats, I think, can bite you, and I think they do poison, if I'm not mistaken. That's a very prominent thing in this game. So, like, poison, if you're up for it, go nuts. But if you hate poison, I just want you to know you're going to be experiencing quite a bit of it. I did kind of like what they did with No Man's Wharf, though, where they were trying to hit you with oil and then tried to explode you, essentially. And the fact that since fire is kind of a big theme in this game as well, that kind of worked out to make quite a bit of sense. But then there was these Belfries, right? So there's Belfry Luna, and there was the other one, which I'm now forgetting, Belfry Soul. For some reason in the middle of it, I guess it's more to do with the Covenant thing. Like, okay, here's a fight with the gargoyles. That's nice. So it's kind of like a shout out to the original Dark Souls. And there's a few of those. You fight Ornstein, for example, or basically someone very much like Ornstein. And that's kind of a nice little, cool little fan servicey thing. I thought that was fun. But I don't know that it really added much to the game other than just to go, oh, wow, oh, that's not a thing I expected to have happen. Like, what was the relevance of ringing the bells? I don't actually still know. I think there was a reason to do it, but I'm not sure it directly affected the game a whole lot. The first one I know did something actually positive. The second one I'm not sure I can recall at all what it did. The one that was out of Iron Keep. I rang it and it was just like, oh, well, you rang a bell. Now what? Maybe this is just, again, a Covenant thing, and I just didn't play enough to know, because although I joined almost all the Covenants, if not all of them, and got all their items, I didn't actually spend any time trying to kill anybody online, as I actually still haven't paid for my Xbox Live subscription again. Probably just going to wait until the PC version and then do the online stuff through that. Next thing, there are a lot of items in Dark Souls 2. You really have to be on top of memorizing what everything is. There's like 100 different various potions and elixirs and things you can imbue things with, and various cracked whatever orbs. It's not really a big deal or anything. It's just the inventory maybe is a little bit cumbersome at times, because although you can sort stuff, and that's fine, you should probably do a bit of sorting. It's basically just like a big old wall full of various items, and sometimes it can be just kind of tricky to pick out the thing you're looking for. I haven't actually checked to see if you could just grab everything that's actually relevant to you and put it on the top of the list, or the top part of the list, but if that's the case, then that's probably what I should have done throughout this. Also, you get a crazy amount of boss souls, too. Like, I don't know what I ended up with. There's a lot of bosses in the game. It's essentially the whole game kind of felt like point A to point B boss, point B to point C boss, point C to point D boss. And there were a few fog walls that didn't seem to lead to bosses, but for the most part, it felt like if you found a fog wall, like a 65 to 70% chance there was going to be a boss on the other side. And since there were constantly bonfires, I didn't really feel all that much, threat about it. There were a few points that were just dastardly and obnoxious from getting from point A to point B and then boss. But for the most part, if it was too bad, I'd just kill everything until it despawned. So it kind of changed the strategy and the risk-reward system, and made things feel substantially less rewarding for me for whatever reason. I guess it's just, I liked the weight that was lent to being physically trapped in a place. You're stuck in Blighttown until you can find your way out for a while. You don't have a way to just teleport away from whatever the problem is. So if you don't like that you're there, well, too bad. You've either got to backtrack or you've got to do some more exploration. And exploration in this game, to some degree, sort of downplayed. And I'm really hoping that I'm wrong about this, but I also haven't maybe still quite 100% of the game. But I haven't found like any kind of equivalent to the Ash Lake hollow situation of Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. It seems very much like all the areas are very laid out. They're on the grid. You can see them in the fast travel system. Eventually you talk to the queen, and she's just like, hey, here's all the places you can go to that even are in the game, and if you miss them, well, we'll just put like a weird filter effect over it so you can't see what it is exactly. But you know exactly how many bonfires now are in each zone, so it's up to you to take the time to either use lockstones or, press A constantly on every single wall you can find until you eventually find the illusory walls. It's not quite as gratifying to me to just press A on all the walls. I like hitting them for whatever reason, but that's just a silly personal preference. That's really kind of here, there, but I don't know that it was necessarily a good decision to quantify every possible location in the game at one point, although when you do get to that point, it's like, all right, well, you're about 85% of the game through already, so I guess it's not quite as bad, or maybe it's closer to 75% at that point. And then they give you this ring, right? And you get the king ring that lets you go through all the king doors. And then you got to go into some memories and fight giants for a while, and that's weird. But for some reason, you can only stay in the memories for like 5 minutes or something, and you got to fight a boss in one of them, and then the other one just kicks your ass for some reason. There's not really anything there either. I think I got some kind of item out of it, but I don't think it was anything that big. And then there was a third sleeping giant tree that just didn't seem to do anything, and that maybe had to do something with the Covenant, but I didn't understand. They set this precedent that there's like every time you find one of these sleeping giants, once you have this point in the progression unlocked, you can go into their memories. But then that one doesn't. So that's kind of inconsistent. And even stranger that they actually had a bonfire location directly next to that particular spot. So that really made me wonder, like, what's going on with that? Am I missing something? Is there more to the story? And maybe there is. And if there is, that's cool. I'd like for there to be more content that I haven't found quite yet. But in general, just a little disappointed with that. It's sort of breaking that trend. I'd honestly prefer that all the areas were completely interconnected. In general, like, if there's a place that's physically somewhere, I'd like to be able to walk to that place instead of be forced through a loading zone to get to it. It just sort of lends this sense of intangible nature to the landscape that I just prefer to see it all concretely laid out in one way or the other. But then you get this king ring, right? And then you've got to sit through these doors opening. And I guess that's a cool reveal if, like, what was on the other side of the door is really exciting and expansive and wonderful and crazy, but every king door that I found is like, all right, well, the one in the first area by the Cardinal Tower is like, you open it, it's just like, oh, that's the area that I could see the whole time from the other side, standing on all those roots. And then you open the final door to go for the final boss run, and it's like, oh, well, this is just like another dark kind of gray-blue castle room. And then you go down some stairs, and it's like, oh, we're actually kind of outside, but we're inside. And then there's just like a really repetitive-looking, I don't know, arena or something on the other side. And when you finally get in there to fight the final boss, it's like, I don't know, it just didn't have that epic quality that it had in the first Dark Souls. There was not, the really stirring music playing. It didn't really feel like there was much happening other than like, oh, it's another one of those bosses that I've just been fighting. The final boss didn't really look any more imposing or any more dangerous than any of the other bosses that I had fought. It just dealt with a particularly annoying status ailment in that you get cursed constantly. And so then you have this really bizarre conundrum where you're starting at this bonfire, and every single time you've got to equip your king ring to open up the door, right? But you also want to equip whatever the best stat boosting things are to get, to the fight. So you've got to go to the bonfire, potentially human effigy if you want to get your summons in, wait through the door opening, run down a really long path for a while, get the 2 summons in, and then as soon as the boss fight starts, you are cursed and you lose your human effigy. I mean, you were going to lose it anyway if you're going to die, right? So it really didn't matter, but it's very unlikely that you're probably going to make it through the fight without losing that humanity. Not like you had anywhere to go afterward, but, that is one nice thing, at least. When you finish the final boss, it's not like they're just like, hey, time for New Game Plus, here you go, and then you're off and running. You actually can just keep playing the game for as long as you want and keep looking for stuff. So I did appreciate that. It gives you a moment, too, if you want to go ahead and kill all the NPCs or whatever. I still haven't restarted my game at the point of this recording, but I may have by the time this goes up. Who knows? I did pretty much find almost everything that I wanted to find, again, minus the couple of bosses that I hadn't gotten to. So, one other thing I guess I wanted to mention, lockstones. How did I feel about those? I still haven't found a good place to farm them. So, I don't know, I kind of didn't really like that. Pretty much everywhere you go, there's like, okay, here's a lockstone gate, or, progression gate of some kind, and if you don't have one, well, you may just find yourself kind of screwed for a while. And then there were some that, I don't know, maybe I misunderstood what was up with this, but like when I was in the tower, the poison tower area with the windmills, right before I fought the boss there, I found this lockstone. I was like, oh man, maybe this is the lockstone that's going to drain the poison out of the boss fight. But what it did was it actually just put like some poison in a little pit in front of me, and that's all I could figure out. It probably did something, but I don't know what it was. So if you know, I guess you could tell me. I don't really mind knowing at this point because I finished the boss anyway. And, incidentally, that boss would have been pretty cool had it not been for the poison pool that you're running through. The idea of a Medusa with, like, its own head in its hand is, I don't know, it's kind of badass. So, not to say that there weren't other badass enemy designs. In fact, the very first thing you fight, the giant, is crazy looking. I was very excited to fight that giant, and then it just kept stomping me, which was pretty frustrating. But, Dark Souls, right? So, I feel like I should again qualify. These are like all of the nitpicky things that were bugging me towards the end of Dark Souls 2. I still had a good time playing through the game. Despite many frustrations, I do grant that many of these opinions are going to shift in the coming weeks. Once I have the PC version, I think a lot of the artistic problems that I had with the game are going to be relieved. I certainly hope so anyway, because honestly, if they go ahead with the PC version having textures that look that bad, they're only going to be exacerbated and look much, much worse at a higher resolution. Because right now, you know, playing the game at 720p on a 360 with like a kind of variable frame rate of 30. I should give credit where credit's due. The game had a pretty solid frame rate for most of it, so can't be upset about that. Oh, and I should mention the artistic sense of the fog zone. Pretty cool. I like the very beginning of it too, and it looks almost like a hallucination out of El Shaddai or something. You walk through the doorway, and it's like, what am I looking at? This is like this crazy, flickering, psychedelic-looking forest, and then you realize just the lighting engine doing weird stuff off in the distance before it realizes that it's going to fill up your whole view range with fog. It was a weird moment, but I thought it was kind of surreal and cool at the same time. I wish there were more moments like that. I just craved the fantasy wildness of, like, you don't know if you're going to stumble upon the crystal caves, or you don't know if you're going to find this endless underwater ocean under the whole game. Like, that's just really cool to me. The environments were very much what made me so excited about Dark Souls, and the fact that they took a more gamey approach in Dark Souls 2, you know, did a little bit less for me this time. Still played through it, still enjoyed it, still have some criticisms. That's expected. Again, I hope you guys don't get the wrong impression from this whole thing. I just wanted to give you kind of a post-mortem in case, and I feel like this is a lot of the time is the case, that people out there feel like I have all these like very specific things that are running around in my head, but I don't have a platform to discuss them with people. Well, I'm very fortunate in the position that I kind of can do that. And again, I really hope that I haven't spoiled the game for anybody that decided to stick around and actually listen to this whole thing, because I do totally think that you should play this through yourself in whatever personal way that you find is the most enjoyable for you, whether that be bringing friends in to summon and raid to fight stuff for you, or whether that be just playing it sort of like I played it, where you're totally offline and you want to meticulously look through every zone, or whether you want to kind of run past everything, or when you fight everything, or you want to try to make 100 different builds. You know, I know a lot of different people that all take their own approach to the game, and I think that's what makes it really kind of a magical, special game, is that there's so many individual ways that you can approach it, and none of them are necessarily wrong. The way that I think I did it might have been a little bit wrong. The fact that I played a super heavy, tanky character that essentially, you know, basically just everything lands on my shield, and then I am sapped of stamina. Like, that's probably not the best way to play the game, but that's just my own personal 2 cents. If you have a way through the game that works like that, by all means, go for it, go nuts, have a ball. But, you know, maybe that's my personal preference. I'm actually having more fun playing as a sorcerer, of all things. I never would have thought that, because I've never really played a spellcaster in a Dark Souls or a Souls game before. But I guess the last thing to wrap it up, if you were on the fence about Dark Souls 2 for some reason, please don't let this be the definitive opinion that shapes your perspective on the game. That is very important that I get that point in. Please play it yourself. Don't necessarily let me steer you in the wrong direction. You may have a totally different judgment when it comes to this. I'm coming from a very much art-centric perspective in that I looked at a lot of those criticisms that I think I've done pretty well to qualify all of them to about as deep a degree as I can. I looked at them with all of that stuff in mind, and I bring a lot of baggage to games. I have very specific kind of niche tastes, and I think anybody that hangs out on the channel probably knows that by now, so I hope that we can keep the comments very civil. Because if this turns into a flame fest, I'm probably not going to do videos like this ever again. But I think it was just cool to go over this stuff. I like that I can record my thoughts, and then I can listen back to this someday, and maybe I can have a very different opinion that I can then go back and reflect upon. And again, I'm totally up for discussion on any of these points, as long as we keep them civil. If you want to disagree with me, I'm totally cool with that again. My perspectives are always open to be shaped in the future. I'm not one of those people that's going to dig in that hard. I mean, I might have some kind of impassioned perspectives, but if you have a good reason and you can cite good, constructive sources on why you feel, and maybe source is not the right word, but, you know, reasons, just good reasons why you say what you say, that I can get behind, I will listen. So, anyway, that's been my post-mortem final look for Dark Souls 2. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me for the last hour and 15-ish minutes. I had a good time going through this stuff. Let me know if this is a thing that you'd like to see me do more often. I'm not necessarily going to make my channel into any kind of Dark Souls-centric channel, but like I said, there might be another video or 2 or 3, depending on how things go, that are off the beaten path of this is a Let's Play, this is an impressions video. The thing that I was actually speaking about, I might actually go ahead and do, is I kind of wanted to show some of my specific criticisms about the art style with some context, with some actual video context, so you can see specifically what I'm talking about. I can, like, literally circle stuff for you. That way I can sort of back up what I'm saying without it just sounding like I'm talking out of my butt, because I really hate when people do that. I don't want to be that guy either. And if I did do that, my apologies. There's always the chance that I might be misunderstood on any one point throughout what I've just said all of this last hour. So if there's a misunderstanding, understand that I will be happy to revisit those thoughts and relook at them, or even put an annotation or whatever if it's particularly egregious. Please don't look at that as an invitation to point out everything that I said that was wrong, though. I would like to not do that. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you again for watching. Happy thoughts, everybody. Thank you for watching. I will see you later.